Chapter 1. Under an unexpected rain. The rain arrived like an uninvited guest, tapping loudly on the hospital's tin roof near midnight. Wind howled through the long, chilly corridors, carrying the damp, musty scent of earth and leaves from the forest behind the building. The fluorescent lights inside flickered through the window, dim like someone's eyelids blinking in a surreal dream. A bolt of lightning sliced the sky, illuminating a small creature standing in the courtyard. Silent, drenched, oddly out of place, a raccoon. It stood at the edge of the porch, its body trembling under the rain, its jet black eyes shining like beads in the night. But what sent a chill down one's spine was not its presence. It was what it held in its mouth, a child's shoe. The tiny shoe was pale blue, with white trim, simple in design yet unmistakably not discarded. It was new, so spotless it could not have been picked up from trash. It seemed well cared for. From the ground floor night station, Nurse Lorraine glanced outside by chance, and in that split second when the lightning flashed, she saw the creature's shape. She froze, her heart pounding. It was as if a bizarre dream had stepped into reality. Whose shoe is that, and why is it standing there, staring at the emergency room? She whispered, not sure if she was speaking to herself or the cold emptiness around. The raccoon did not move. It stood motionless, like a living statue, the shoe still in its mouth. Behind it, the rain fell like a curtain onto the ground, merging with the courtyard's light into a faint pearl-colored glow. For a few seconds, Lorraine felt something strange. She had seen raccoons before, of course, scavenging through trash, darting across roads, or hiding under cars. But this was a hospital. The courtyard was clean, not a scrap of food in sight. No daring animal would come out in such heavy rain. Yet, it had come, not to find something, but to deliver. Then, as though sensing the gaze from inside, the raccoon slowly lowered the shoe onto the tiled floor. It lifted its head, and its glossy black eyes seemed not to look at Lorraine, but through the window, fixed on the emergency room at the end of the hallway. It was the only place still lit, and the monitors beeped steadily there. A shiver ran down the nurse's spine. She could not explain the feeling. A kind of omen, an uncanny connection between the human world and a wild creature. No sound, no explanation, only a question piercing her mind. What is it trying to say? Why, of all places, did it bring that shoe here? Thunder rolled again. The raccoon turned its head but did not flee. It sat down quietly and waited, as if waiting for someone. Lorraine backed away slowly from the window, afraid to break the strange moment. At the same time, footsteps echoed down the corridor, soft, deliberate, as if someone walked quietly. Not wanting to be noticed, a woman in a patient gown appeared, gaunt, her hair disheveled from sleeplessness. Emily. She clung to the railing as she walked, her gaze vacant and stunned. Unreal. The young mother had been in this hospital for 3 weeks, shattered by an indescribable shock. Her 3-year-old son had vanished from the park in less than 10 minutes. No witnesses, no trace, not even a cry. After 48 hours, the police declared survival chances extremely low. Emily never believed her son was dead, but that belief, after every day waiting, every hour clutching his photo in therapy, bled into despair. That night, she could not sleep, strangely, but dream kept playing, the boy standing barefoot in the forest, crying, calling for his mother. She had gone to the hospital kitchen to get water, when her eyes landed on something outside the window. A shoe, pale blue, with white trim. Her heart stopped for a moment. The water bottle slipped from her hand. The memory struck like a blade. The last image of her son before he left was those shoes. A limited edition design she had ordered from Europe. It could not be a coincidence. She ran to the door, threw it open despite the cold rain lashing her face. The shoe was there, right at the threshold, sopping wet, but the brand, the stitching, unique to that design, could not be wrong. And the raccoon, it stepped back a pace. Unafraid, it looked at Emily for a long time, as if it understood, as if it had found the right person. Emily collapsed to her knees, hands trembling as she held the shoe. She wanted to scream, to ask someone, how, why, where, but there was no answer. Only the rain and the small creature, turning away, stepping slowly, then pausing and looking back at her. That gaze, it was not that of a wild animal. It was a message, an invitation, a glimmer of hope. Chapter 2. The Shoe and the Question. Emily stood frozen in the rain. The shoe lay gently in her hand, cold as ice, yet her heart burned like it was on fire. Raindrops mixed with tears that she had not even noticed falling. She brought the shoe close to her face. The light from the hallway revealed every stitch, every faint smudge on the sole. And then her eyes stopped at a tiny red ink mark, a messy little flower her son had once drawn while playing with a pen. There was no mistake, it was his. Her heart pounded like a drum in the desert. Each beat pulled another memory back to life. His laughter, the tiny footsteps racing around the sofa, the way he pleaded, "Mommy, help me put on my shoes." Every morning, it all came rushing back, crashing over her like an unstoppable flood. The raccoon was still there. It had not left, just waited at the edge of the darkness, where the hospital's hallway lights could not reach. It turned its head and looked at her. That look lasted only a few seconds, but it planted something inside Emily. Something vague, hard to name. Then it turned away and vanished into the rain. "Wait!" Emily bolted up and ran after it, her feet slipping on the wet tiles. But when she reached the grassy yard, the creature was gone. All that remained was the sound of the rain and the tiny shoe in her hand, like evidence from another world. The next morning, Emily sat clutching the shoe in the office of her psychologist. In front of her was Dr. Han, who had patiently listened to her for the past 3 weeks. Today, she said nothing, just quietly observed the pale face of the young mother. "Are you sure that is really the same shoe?" Her voice was warm and slow. Emily nodded, gripping it so tightly her knuckles turned white. "I recognized the ink mark and the brand logo. It is unique. This is not a coincidence. Doctor, it just cannot be." Dr. Han sighed. "Maybe someone found it and brought it here. But a raccoon?" Emily cut in, her eyes flaring with a painful glimmer. "Why would it choose to bring it here? Why not somewhere else? And why on the night I could not sleep because I dreamed of my son?" Silence stretched between them, like a cliff neither could cross. No one in that room had an answer for what had happened. But Emily felt something stirring inside her, like an invisible thread pulling her back from the edge of despair. That night, she returned to the same spot. She stood under the hospital's overhang and waited. Nothing happened. The next night, still nothing. But on the third night, when the rain returned, gentler this time, like a soft whisper, Emily saw it, the raccoon. This time, it was not carrying the shoe, but a crumpled piece of fabric, light yellow, with green trim. Emily stepped out, her heart clenched. It was a piece of the blanket her son used to sleep with every night. The end had a little rabbit that was frayed and worn. She rushed forward, collapsed to her knees, and the tears came again. The raccoon stood a few steps away, watching her as if trying to confirm something. Then, like the first night, it turned and walked away. But this time, it stopped at the edge of the courtyard, turned its head toward her, and walked a few more steps. Emily watched, her hand clenched the fabric, her mind blank, and then, a thought struck her. It wanted her to follow. She began studying the creature's behavior. On every rainy night, it returned. Each time, it brought a piece of memory, a red Lego brick her son used to stuff into his pocket, a tiny plastic spoon, even a torn piece of a children's drawing sheet with the scribbled word, "Help." Shaky letters that looked like they were written by a trembling child's hand. Emily documented everything. She took pictures, wrote down the time, searched through every memory tied to each item, and she realized these were not just familiar things. They were the ones that had vanished along with her son on that fateful day. They could not have reappeared on their own. One night, under a dim moon, the raccoon lingered longer than usual. It stared at her for a long time, and then, instead of leaving, it began walking toward the fence behind the hospital. Emily looked around. The courtyard was empty. The staff had gone inside. She pulled her coat tighter and followed its shadow through the rusty fence. There was a small path leading into the forest. She had seen it before, but never dared to go in. The raccoon led the way, not rushing, but just fast enough that she could not lose sight of it. Each step weighed heavy on her. Dry branches snapped beneath her feet. The smell of decaying leaves and damp earth rose up. Insects hummed in the background like sounds from another world. But she kept going, because something inside her had awakened. Not instinct, but the intuition of a mother. At the end of the path, they reached a shallow swamp, a place whispered about in the hospital. Where people said someone once went missing, the raccoon hopped over a fallen log and disappeared into a clump of bushes. Emily hesitated, then followed, and there, deep in the soggy, dark earth where no one dared step, she saw the first thing that froze her blood. A footprint, not just one, two, one large, one small, pressed into the mud, fresh, as if someone had just walked by. Scattered nearby were a few medical items, a piece of gauze, a broken syringe, and further out, a torn fragment of a white lab coat. Emily gasped. Her heart could no longer bear it. She collapsed onto the ground, her hands shaking uncontrollably. But what she felt was not fear. It was a spark of light blazing through the darkness. Her son might still be alive. The raccoon returned, standing at the edge of the mud. Its eyes no longer looked at her. They waited, as if telling her what she needed to do. Chapter 3. The Return Trips. The next morning, Emily woke up in her familiar hospital room, but the heaviness in her chest was gone. She spent hours gazing at the items the raccoon had brought, tiny traces that once seemed meaningless. Now the only thread connecting her to the child she thought was gone forever. She pinned them up on the board above her bed, like clues in a strange case. Not to investigate, but to keep herself from falling apart, because if this was a dream, she never wanted to wake up. That night, the sky was dry, no rain, but Emily still stepped out into the courtyard, flashlight in hand, eyes locked on the darkness behind the forest. She was not expecting anything, but she hoped. She had learned that sometimes, the strange things in life do not arrive on schedule. And she was right. From the bushes, a soft rustling sound, a small shadow darted through the beam of her flashlight. This time, the raccoon was not alone. It was dragging something small and round, a yellow Lego brick with a corner that had clearly been bitten off. Emily rushed forward, her heart tightening. Her son had a Lego spaceship set, his last birthday gift from her, and this yellow piece was the ship's nose cone, the one he carried everywhere like a lucky charm. She remembered the night before he disappeared. He had slipped it into his coat pocket before going to the park. The police never found it. Everyone told her not to read too much into it. But now, it was here. She looked up at the raccoon. Once again, it turned and vanished into the forest shadows. There was no more doubt. It was leading her. Emily began tracking it, not just the raccoon, but the entire forest behind the hospital. She learned to recognize sounds, to distinguish tracks. She sketched small maps in her notebook, where she had seen footprints, where she had found fabric, where strange lights flickered in the distance. She was no longer afraid. The pain had hollowed her out completely. So recklessness was the only thing she had left. She knew she could not tell anyone about this. No doctor would believe her. No hospital staff would follow her into the woods, chasing the trail of a wild animal. Every night after that, the raccoon returned. Each time, it brought another item, a silent message, a living memory. The tiger-shaped plastic spoon with the familiar scratch on the handle, a bottle cap from his favorite milk, and then, one night, a small, crumpled scrap of paper with a pencil-written word, "Help." Emily sat down on the ground, her hands shaking as she held the paper. The handwriting was messy, childlike, but not her son's. Someone had tried to write a signal, and the raccoon, it was the outstretched arm of desperation. She decided to go deeper, not just to the forest's edge, but into the swamp itself, the place hospital staff had quietly called the restricted zone with no clear reason. There were rumors about an abandoned medical research station, about someone living alone in the woods, even chilling ghost stories. Emily did not care. She followed the raccoon to the same area where she had seen the footprints before. This time, under the pale moonlight, she saw more: torn medicine boxes, broken IV tubing, a mud-stained latex glove, and most striking of all, a strip of cloth tied between two small trees, like a trail marker. Her heart raced. The raccoon turned back, standing closer than ever before. It stared at her without blinking, then turned again and slipped into the brush. Emily followed, each step sinking into mud, each breath tightening with cold and fear. Suddenly, she stopped. In front of her, through the withered trees, stood a small wooden shack, almost collapsed, covered in old tarp and scraps of fabric. A faint light seeped through a crack in the door, and from inside, sounds, not voices, breathing, labored, faint, like from someone who had been bedridden for a long time. Mixed in were soft clinking noises, as if something was dropping onto the wooden floor. Emily moved closer, heart about to explode. Every part of her body screamed for her to turn back, but she could not. Everything had led her here. Every clue, every object, and those raccoon eyes. There was no mistake. She bent down, picked up a rock, hands trembling, then gently pushed the door. It was not locked. The door creaked open, and what she saw inside nearly stopped her breath. On a makeshift bed built from wooden crates, under the dim glow of a light bulb wired to an old battery, was a child, frail, tiny, half of the face hidden under a filthy blanket, eyes closed, breathing slow but steady. Beside the bed, a man, thin to the bone, with wild, tangled facial hair and clothes patched together from anything he could find. He sat slumped, head down, one hand loosely holding a torn stuffed doll. Emily stepped in, barely able to breathe. She approached the child. She could not see the face through the dirt and time, but when she gently pulled the blanket down, saw the small star-shaped birthmark on the left shoulder. She collapsed, sobbing. It was her son, alive, still alive. Chapter 4. The Truth Beneath the Mud. The old shack looked like a scar in the heart of the forest. Small, makeshift, and filled with unnamed pain. Inside, the air was thick with the scent of stale antiseptic, damp cloth, and human presence. A tiny bulb flickered like the last bit of light left in a dark abyss. Emily knelt beside the bed, unable to stop shaking. Her trembling hand reached for her son's cheek, cold and dry, but still faintly warm. His small lips moved unconsciously, like they were trying to summon something from memory. The boy lay there, motionless, so thin it seemed a strong wind might shatter him. Evan, his name escaped her lips like a sob. She did not dare believe it, not fully, until his tiny hand, weak as it was, moved just slightly. She broke down, the cry of a mother who had just seen her child return from the dead. A sob too full to speak, as if months of numbness had burst free as tears. The sound woke the man beside the bed. He jolted upright, instinctively retreating, eyes wide. In the weak light, his face was revealed, middle-aged, hollow, hair matted with dirt, patchy beard, and eyes so cloudy it was as if he had lived outside humanity for far too long. "Who are you?" His voice was raspy, like dead leaves being crushed underfoot. Emily did not answer. She kept holding her son's hand, her gaze filled with love and fury, gratitude and panic. Why did you keep my son here? How long?" The man backed up against the wooden wall, muttering, I did not hurt him. I just wanted to keep him safe. Someone wanted to take him." "What are you talking about?" Emily stood up, her eyes blazing. "Who wanted to take him? Who are you?" "I am Thomas," he panted, his eyes darting around. "A former volunteer at the hospital last year." She froze. That name was familiar. It had come up once during a staff meeting. Someone who had worked in the children's psychiatric care program. He had abruptly quit. No one looked into it. No one paid attention. "Your family." Thomas pointed a shaky finger at her, as if trying to summon a memory. "Your mother once saved me. I was in an accident, in the hospital. She was a doctor, kind." Emily stepped back, overwhelmed. Her mother, yes, she had worked at this hospital for over 30 years, but she had passed away early, while Emily was still in college. How could he have known? "I owe your family," Thomas whispered, as if speaking to himself. "I saw your son, lost. I knew someone would hurt him. I had to keep him. I had to repay the debt." "Repay it by kidnapping my son?" Emily shouted, tears streaming. "By leaving him lying there like a corpse? Do you have any idea what I have lived through?" Thomas trembled, holding his head. I did not know what to do. He had a fever. I could not bring him to the hospital. I was scared they would take him." Emily wanted to lunge at him, to scream in his face that he was insane, cruel, monstrous. But then her eyes paused on the empty baby food cans beside the bed, the patchwork blankets sewn by hand, and the old fever medicine bottle. He had actually cared for Evan, in a twisted, broken way, but it was still care. Her son was alive because of it. "The raccoon," she turned, as if remembering all at once. It led me here." Thomas nodded. "It was the only one brave enough to go out. I let it carry things your son once held. I hope someone would recognize them." Emily stood speechless. So it was not just instinct, not just a miracle. It was a plan, a desperate, fragile hope. A small animal had become the bridge between despair and salvation. A distant siren wailed. Police. Emily had called them using Thomas's old phone, charged with a solar battery. Her hands still held her son's, and for the first time in months, she felt her heart beating for the right reason. When the police burst in, Thomas did not resist. He simply sat on the ground, mumbling about light, about deaths, about a forest that could speak. Emily carried Evan outside. The sun had broken through after days of rain. The air was fresh and warm, as if the world itself was welcoming back a child who had returned from the dead. The raccoon stood at the forest's edge, watching. It did not approach. It did not retreat. It simply stood there, quietly, like a witness to the miracle that had come true. She turned back, locking eyes with it. No words were needed, just a look, as if saying everything that mattered. "Thank you for not giving up." Chapter 5. A quiet departure. 1 week later, the city sky rained again. It was not the violent storm from the first night, but a soft kind of rain, damp like a mother's palm smoothing the hair of her child after a nightmare. The rain fell evenly, slowly, as if time itself had learned to breathe more gently after all the unexplainable things that had happened. Evan was transferred to the intensive care unit at the central hospital. In the first few days, he said nothing, did not cry, and showed no reaction. He just lay there, eyes wide open, drifting, as if he was still lost in another world, where none of the human rules applied. Emily stayed by his side every day, never leaving. She did not speak much. She simply told old stories, about the time he nearly fell into the koi pond chasing a dragonfly, about the dinosaur cake on his birthday. She brought into the room every item the raccoon had delivered, placing them around Evan like scattered fragments of memory. Each item, a thread stitching back together a broken soul. And then, one afternoon, when the pale sunlight touched the window glass, the boy turned his head slightly toward her and asked, "Mom, has the rain stopped?" Emily burst into tears. Thomas, the wandering man who had protected Evan through delusion, was taken to a secure psychiatric facility. No one wanted to press charges, not even Emily, because when she looked into his eyes, clouded but still holding a warped glimmer of affection, she did not see a criminal. She saw a lost soul who had done the wrong thing with every right intention he had left. The media never got the full story. The police kept it quiet. The hospital chose silence. The entire tale was summed up in a single line on a local news segment. A mysteriously missing boy found after 3 months, survived by a stroke of impossible luck. Only Emily knew it was not luck. One early morning, when Evan was sleeping peacefully, his breath steady like a lullaby of autumn, Emily returned to the wooden shack. No one stopped her, but no one offered to go along either. That place had become part of a past no one wanted to touch. Except her. The forest trail was still damp. Mud still clung underfoot. The trees still whispered like storytellers with no voices. Emily walked slowly, carrying a small bag. Inside were all the things the raccoon had brought: the shoe, the Lego brick, the blanket scrap, and the piece of paper that said, "Help." When she arrived, she froze. The shack was gone. Only bare ground remained, with a few scorched wooden beams and ashes scattered as if the wind had decided to erase the final traces of something that should not have existed. Emily knelt down and placed the bag in the middle of the clearing. She did not pray. She did not make a wish. She just whispered, very softly, as if speaking to herself, "Thank you." Then she turned to leave, when suddenly, a breeze swept across her shoulder, cool and weightless, and from the edge of the forest, where sunlight beamed down like a blessing from the sky, a small creature quietly stepped forward. The raccoon. This time, it carried nothing, no shoe, no object. It simply stood there, under the sunlight filtering through the leaves, its wet fur shimmering faintly like silver. In that moment, time seemed to stop. They looked at each other for a long while. No one stepped closer, no one backed away, only a gaze, like a goodbye that needed no words. The wind picked up. The raccoon turned its head and walked back into the woods. Not in a hurry, not afraid, as if its mission had been fulfilled. Emily stepped forward, wanting to call out, wanting to say something, but she stopped. Where the raccoon had stood, there was only a small paw print in the damp earth. Beside it, a single silver hair gleaming in the sun. She bent down, picked up the hair, and placed it in her palm, closing her hand gently. Her heart warmed in a way she had not felt in a long time. She looked up at the sky. The clouds drifted slowly. The sunlight was just bright enough to see everything clearly. She asked, without needing an answer, "How did you know, and why me?" Chapter 6. Echoes from the Forest. Some connections need no words. A raccoon that could not speak. A mother who had nearly forgotten how to hope. A child lying silent at the edge of life and death. None of them knew why, but somehow, nature had chosen them to write a story that reason alone could never create. In the darkest corners of despair, sometimes the first light does not come from advice or rescue. It comes from the eyes of a quiet, loyal wild creature. The raccoon did not know right from wrong, but it knew what was worth holding on to. Perhaps the world does not run on rules, but on invisible threads that link people to nature, to memory, and to pain. And sometimes, it is the smallest of creatures that becomes the bridge between loss and the miraculous. In Emily's memory, for the rest of her life, one moment always remained: the deep, silent look the creature gave her before it disappeared into the forest. A goodbye that needed no words, just enough to know some miracles do not come from God, but from the deepest places of instinct and love.